Good evening and welcome to the March 7th, 2023 Coeur d'Alene City Council meeting. The clerk will note that all council are present, and our invocation tonight is by Bob Reinhardt from the Baha'i Faith. Good evening, and would you please stand?
Thank you, Mayor Hammond.
Thank you.
Okay, I should preface by saying in the Baha'i religion, we primarily use prayers in our gatherings from our sacred writings, and so it might sound somewhat like the Lord's Prayer in the New Testament is used in private and communal worship. So it might sound a little different to the ear, but hopefully it still resonates with the hearts and minds tonight. Okay. So we offer this prayer at this time to our Creator to assist our City Council and all the participants in this meeting in their deliberations this evening and in their future service to our city and to all of its inhabitants. O thou merciful God, O thou who art mighty and powerful, O thou most kind Father, these servants have gathered together, turning to thee, supplicating thy threshold, desiring thine endless bounties from thy assurance. They have no purpose save thy good pleasure. They have no intention save service to the world of humanity. O God, make this assemblage radiant. Make the hearts merciful. Confer the bounties of the Holy Spirit. Endow them with a power from heaven. Bless them with heavenly minds. Increase their sincerity, so that with all humility and contrition they may turn to thy kingdom and be occupied with service to the world of humanity. O kind Father, confer thy blessings. Consider not our shortcomings. Shelter us under thy protections. O God, endow us with thy providence. Thou art the powerful, thou art the giver, thou art the beneficent. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Now we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance, and Amy will lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we move on to the next item, I've been asked to make an announcement. An allegation has been made by a member of the public that internal city staff meetings conducted after the February 7th council meeting and before the February 21st council meeting regarding the Coeur annexation request violated the open meeting law. After consultation with council, we have been told that these meetings did not involve members of the City Council or the Planning and Zoning Commission and therefore are not subject to the open meeting law pursuant to Idaho Code 74-208. Thus, no cure is needed. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Okay, we do have a couple presentations tonight. The first one, I'm going to turn over to Kiki to do that introduction. Thank you, Kiki.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. I just wanted to first say that this is regarding the award on the agenda tonight. And I'm just so proud of the wide range of people who have been involved in putting together all the efforts behind the Historic Preservation Commission and this work. We've got longtime locals who've lived here, newcomers on the board, volunteers, private investors, and government. And it really, the work that they've done just kind of illustrates the ability for us all to come together to do something good that preserves our heritage, tells our stories, and shows how we're really willing and able to work together as a community. So with that, I would like to call up to the podium our current chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, Walter Burns, and the chair of the award subcommittee, Sandy Emerson, to introduce some other dignitaries and present this award this evening. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Walter Burns. I'm chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, as she said. Our commission was formed in 2020 with the purpose of celebrating and preserving Coeur d'Alene's rich history and architectural heritage. Late in 2020, we applied and received a grant from the State Historic Preservation Office to develop a historic preservation plan, which went extremely well. And when it was completed and blessed by you folks, it has been appended to the city's comprehensive plan. We use it as a blueprint for how to move forward with our commission. We're currently focusing on the nomination of the Downtown Garden District to the National Register of Historic Places. It's funded again by a grant from State Historic Preservation Office. If anyone would like to volunteer to help with that effort, because it's quite an undertaking, I encourage you to attend one of our meetings. They're held on the fourth Thursday of each month, 4 p.m. here at City Hall. There at City Hall. And everyone is welcome to attend. We definitely like to have feedback and input from the community. I'll now turn the presentation over to Commissioner Sandy Emerson, who spearheaded the development of the Heart of History Award that we're giving tonight. Sandy?
Thank you, President Walter, Mayor, Commissioners. It's an honor to be here, or Councilman. It's an honor to be here, and I'm just honored to be on the Historic Preservation Commission. It's started up going on 3 years now, and quite a few accomplishments, but one of the ones that I'm pretty happy with and involved with is trying to recognize good effort in this regard and preserving historic buildings and keeping them from being demolished or altered in such a way that it really changes the character of even the neighborhood has been an important part of trying to think our way through this. Dave Walker was the original chairman, and he helped put together the idea of we need to have some elements to promote what we're doing and let people know in the community. So this helps do that. We have some representatives. I don't think anybody needs to be told about what the Hamilton House is. I called it the Hawkins House because that's what it was when I was around. And it's been the kind of the cornerstone, in my view, of the whole Government Way corridor. And if it were to change or be torn down and leave a hole in the ground or a parking lot, it might change the character and culture of that part of town. I think Woody would possibly agree. He knows that pretty well. And so it's one of those things that kind of, again, heart of history, but it comes from the heart. With that, we need to recognize a few people here. Deb Mitchell works with the Museum of North Idaho, and she has Rebecca Stevens and...
Sandy, please turn around so that
Sorry.
you're on the mic.
Thank you.
Yep.
I don't want to let anybody miss this. Where's my good looks? But Deb Mitchell is with the Museum of North Idaho.
Sandy?
Pull them forward.
The
She's with
micro-
the Museum of North Idaho. She's a
You're robbing all the viewing public from your beautiful face.
I appreciate that, Mayor. You're one of the people
And they
that
can't hear you.
notices things like that. Anyway, she and Rebecca Stevens and Cindy Nunn did a marvelous job writing. They researched this house right down to the day it was built and who built it. And the part of the award has the picture, the original architect's drawing of the house in 1908, I think it was, Deb. And then the current one with the Music Conservatory, and we'll hear just real briefly about that as well. Yes, sir.
Back around.
What?
We can't
Back
hear
around, thanks.
He's a walkabout.
I'm just looking to see who's here so I know what to say next. I have my notes. And we have some folks that we need to recognize right along with everybody else. There's a string of people who've worked on this that are amazing. But Pepper Smock is here. Don Smock is his given name. He's a local icon, if you will, friend of mine for most of my life. And he helped, along with former Mayor Steve Widmeyer, make this happen by stepping up. And they definitely need to be recognized along with the others. Let's see, I'm trying to see who all is here. And we have members of our committee, our commission, who will recognize when this award is completed. We're going to have a reading the award, and then the presentation, and then a photograph of the group, if that works for everybody.
Julie,
I have, and Julian, we need to have Julene.
she's here.
Where did you go? There you are. And her crew is just amazing. She's got people here who have been essential to make this happen, and she would recognize them as well. So thank you. We'll come up when we're done here and speak to that. And then lastly, I have, before we read the award itself and make the presentation, there is a letter from the State Historical Society. Don Pishner is the Region 1 representative to that, and he has a letter that he wanted to be read into the record very briefly. It's from Jan Gallimore, the director of the State Historical Society. And it says, "Congratulations, Hamilton House partners. Your contributions and efforts to save the historic structure are commendable. Steve, Pepper, Julene, Deb, Cindy, and all the rest of the volunteers greatly deserve recognition. Respectfully, Don Pishner, Idaho State Historic Society, and Jan Gallimore, Director." And we've got a couple other people to recognize. I was looking around because I wanted to see if Sandy Sanderson or Mary got to be here. But we do have Ruth Ann Hawkins, who's one of the original occupants, grew up in the house, provided a lot of the music that it's famous for, and that's she's here to represent the Hawkins family. I think you remember Jim Hawkins, who is the director of the State Department of Commerce under 3 governors and 2 different parties. So it's quite an honor to have them here. And again, the Sandersons, you know them as well. Those were the prior owners of the house. The McNaughtons were their grandparents. So our house is significant to this community, and just saving it is a huge accomplishment. And Walter, did you want to read the award?
All right. And looking at this, I wish you'd written a shorter award, but I'll try to get through it. The City of Coeur d'Alene Historic Preservation Commission recognizes the effort of the Music Conservatory, its supporters and collaborators, and the historical researchers for engaging effectively and steadfastly in rallying the community to act in saving this historic residence, representative of the period of iconic Government Way neighborhood character. The effort resulted in the residence being listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Built in 1908 for the second mayor of the city, Boyd Hamilton, and his wife Alta, it has been the home of a number of notable residents of local, state, and national prominence. Its architectural style and design in prominent location sets the cornerstone of the historic character of the entire Government Way neighborhood corridor, while serving and enhancing the culture of the community as the home of the Music Conservatory of Coeur d'Alene. It stands as a beacon of community cooperation and resolve in the face of looming demolition. The volunteers who saw its high and larger purpose, the visionary leadership, the donors, and particularly the generous investors who purchased it and continue to their stewardship and generous philanthropy for community use, are collectively recognized. All of these contributors for its preservation are collectively recognized. Oh, it says that twice. They have truly exhibited a heart of history.
Thank you, Walter.
Do we present it at this point?
We're going to have folks come forward. But before I do that, Julene had an important recognition she would like to make. So I think it's very worthy.
Do I talk right in here?
Right there.
Right there.
Yes, I had an hour ago the Eagle Scout, Alex Kashubi, that made, with his troop and all the help of Kent Kimball, getting all the rocks to do the bedding outside of the house. Then the Hawkins family from Boise, 3 different families down there, gave major donations along with Kent from nurseries to make the house look like what it is today. And so I'm very grateful. I wanted to recognize Alex and his scout troop. I also have so many people. Something like this doesn't happen without a huge team of people. And the paint was donated that painted the house. Jeff Conaway made from Silver Creek Signs, donated, designed, and installed the sign. Of course, Steve had the sidewalks put in, and John DeBall comes and does the yards. He comes and mows the lawn. There's just so many people. I'm so grateful that Deborah Mitchell has the house now on the historical registry. Annie Lutrup has done all of our graphic designs for us for the last year and a half. There's just so many people. Joanne Smith, every room in that house has a piano that was donated. Everything in the house is donated with rugs, pianos, instruments, and I can't give enough thanks to the
Donors.
yes. Okay. I just can't tell you. There's so many people. Can't list them all. Take your time.
We are going to do a presentation.
Okay.
And those folks who've been involved in Mention, please come forward, and we'll have a presentation right up here. Where would we do that, Mr. Mayor?
Right there.
Just right facing this way?
Sure.
Maybe up here, just so it's, just in front of the dais, and then we'll have the mayor and Kiki as our liaison come down. I'll take your photo. Yeah, you guys can kind of group together there. Oh, yeah. Here, have to squeeze together, folks. Yeah, can you guys come over this way a little bit, and this way a little bit, and maybe layer? Can you shift to your right a little bit?
We don't do this very often.
Yeah, there we go. Everybody look this way. Walter, I guess
It is Chris Felios, huh?
So Deb, Julene, and all who participated in this amazing effort and long time coming effort, it's my pleasure on behalf of the Historic Preservation Commission of Coeur d'Alene to present you with this award.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We, as the mayor and council, are very appreciative of all those efforts, and I know it does take a lot of folks to put something like this together, and there was a lot of generosity, particularly by a former mayor and by an icon in our city. Thank you to both of you. Our history, we are lost without our history, so it's important to preserve that. We also have a proclamation, and I'm going to read a part of that. And is Tina here? Great. I'll have you come up in just a second, Tina. Thank you. Whereas during American Red Cross Month in March, we celebrate the humanitarian spirit of Coeur d'Alene and reaffirm our commitment to help ensure no one faces a crisis alone. And whereas caring for one another is at the heart of our community and is exemplified by the people of Coeur d'Alene whose simple acts of kindness through the Red Cross provide help and hope in people's most difficult moments. Whereas every day these extraordinary individuals lend a helping hand to make an extraordinary difference for neighbors in need, and whether it's providing emergency shelter, food, or comfort for families displaced by home fires or other disasters. And whereas their support, volunteerism, and generous donations are critical to our community's resilience, we hereby recognize this month of March in honor of all those who fulfill Clara Barton's noble words. You must never think of anything except the need and how to meet it, and ask everyone to join in this commitment. Now therefore I, James Hammond, Mayor of the City of Coeur d'Alene, do hereby proclaim the month of March 2023 as Red Cross Month and encourage all citizens of the City of Coeur d'Alene to reach out and support its humanitarian mission. And Tina, if I could get you to come up and accept this proclamation. We present this proclamation because we want to recognize the value of Red Cross and all that it brings to our community. Thank you very much. Next, we have a mid-year budget update by our comptroller, Vonnie Jensen.
Good evening, Mayor Hammond and council members. Get this, there we go. I am here to give you a financial update. I added a slide to this presentation after the packet went out. Hopefully you all had a chance to see that. I sent the revised one out yesterday. This presentation hits several different topics, so please stop me at any time you have questions or comments. I'm getting over a cold, so I will probably not get through this very easily. We talk about fund balance a lot, so I wanted to define what that is. The fund balance is the difference between the city's assets and liabilities, usually defined at the end of the fiscal year. In the general fund, the assets normally consist of cash and receivables that are expected to be received within 60 days from year end. Liabilities are expenses that are expected to be paid in that same day period. When the liabilities are subtracted from the assets, that number is what you have available, like a savings account. The unassigned fund balance is the balance after subtractions for funds that are previously committed to future projects. Some of these are restrictions imposed from outside the city, such as drug seizures that legally have to be spent to enforce laws on drugs. Others are commitments by the city council, such as the commitment to buy the property next to the police station. The unassigned fund balance is the amount available in the savings account that isn't already spoken for. This is the money available to present a cash flow issue. The fund balance in the general fund has increased about $2 million in the last 5 years, but due to expenses also increasing, the percent of fund balance to expenses is almost the same as it was 5 years ago. At the end of September 2022, there was a slight drop in fund balance of $527,000. This is good news, as the 2021-22 budget forecasted a use of $1.2 million in order to balance the budget. Due to expenses coming in lower and revenues higher, the fund balance didn't take as big a hit as expected. As we've talked about before, the Government Finance Officers Association recommends at a minimum that agencies keep 16.7% of their operating expenses in fund balance. The city ended 2022 at 24.5%. The difference between the recommended 16.7% and the 24.5% is a depletion of about $3.8 million. This seems like a large surplus, but to put it in perspective, the current approved budget for 22-23 forecasts the use of $2 million to fund capital purchases. And there will always be capital items that need to be replaced. It would only take 2 years to be under the recommended 16.7% at that current expense rate. The 8 categories listed on this slide encompass 90% of the general fund revenue. 3 of these categories have restrictions on their use. Kootenai County EMS revenues are restricted to fire personnel expenses. State highway user funds must be used for street improvement and maintenance expenses, and building permit revenues are tied to the expenses of permitting and inspection. As you can see, there have been some pretty big increases in sales and gas taxes in the last 4 years. Preliminary projected revenues for the general fund for 23-24 are $51.8 million. This is a decrease over the current year of $5.3 million. This is due to the $6 million in ARPA funds that are included in the current year's budget. If you eliminate that category, it is about a $700,000 increase in revenues. I've included a small amount of new growth in the property tax projection, but did not include any portion of the allowed 3% increase. The new growth amount projected is the same amount as the new growth for the current fiscal year. Franchise fees and the state revenues have been projected using historical increases and are actually projected here higher than what I am comfortable with. I have not received the forecasts from the state for sales, gas, and liquor tax. I will send those out to you as soon as I get them. Building permits for the first 5 months of 22-23 are down 50% from last year at this time, so they have been projected lower for next year. Kootenai EMS will likely go up slightly in the new year, which hasn't been reflected here, and transfers have been increased about 2.5%. The first quarter liquor tax distribution is 18% of budget. Last year, the first one was 19% of budget. We've only received one payment from the state so far this year. The gas tax distribution came in at 21.57% of budget, and last year was 25%. The sales tax this year and last year were right at 23% of budget in the first quarter. So moving on to expenses. Since the budget cycle hasn't yet begun, these projections are very preliminary. The departments have not yet started the budget process for services and supplies or capital outlay. The finance department, with the assistance of HR, has worked through all of the personnel expenses for fiscal year 23-24. Since the fire and police contracts are already in place, we are able to tell you what the budget needs to be for those departments for next year, and those amounts are reflected on this slide. The only unknown at this time is any increases that may occur in health insurance and any COLAs that would happen with negotiations with Lake City employees. The numbers on the screen include all scheduled merit increases and scheduled COLAs for both police and fire, along with a few other minor contract changes. There are no COLA increases included in this projection for LCEA employees or exempt employees. There are no increases to services and supplies from the current budget on this slide, and the only capital outlay included is for new police vehicles. And again, there are also no increases to health insurance included for any of the departments. With that being said, the preliminary projected revenue for the general fund of $51.8 million, subtract out the projected expenses of $52.8, leaves a shortfall of slightly over $1 million before any COLAs for LCEA and exempt employees and any health insurance increases, capital outlay, or the effects of inflation on services and supplies. If the council were to approve the allowed 3% tax increase, that would generate $767,000, which would not cover the $1 million deficit occurring from merit increases and COLA increases for fire and police. This slide shows a comparison year over year for just wages and benefits. The current budget includes a 4.5% COLA in the police department, so the $1,181,000 increase is due to the 3% that was approved above the budget for fiscal year 22-23 and the 4.5% approved for fiscal year 23-24. It also includes a 3% COLA for fire and 0% for LCEA and exempt. So the total increase to wages and benefits from the current budget to the projected 23-24 budget is $2.1 million. This is a slide I added, and I added it because it gives you another look at where the increases are coming from that make up the total wage and benefit increase of $2.1 million. There's a scheduled change to per Z rates that will go into effect July 1st of 2023 and another change July 1st of 2024. The general employee per Z rate will drop from 11.94% to 11.18% July 1st of 2023, and then increase back up to 11.96 on July 1st of 24. This will cause a savings of $46,000 for fiscal year 23-24. But the public safety employees per Z rate will increase from 12.28% to 13.26, July 1st of 2023, and increase again to 13.98% on July 1st of 2024. This will cause an increase to the 23-24 budget of $206,000. Merit increases to all departments except public safety will increase the budget by $173,000, and public safety merit increases will increase the budget by $263,000. The extra 3% COLA for police that was not budgeted in the current budget will increase next year's budget by $296,000, and the 4.5% contracted for 23-24 will generate an increase of $619,000. The 3% contracted increase to the fire personnel will generate an increase of $259,000, and the 2 additional firefighter medics that were approved after the budget was finalized and are being paid for with funds from Kootenai County EMS cause an increase of $262,000. The approved increase to council wages actually generates an increase of just under $21,000 for 23-24. This number had for the whole year instead of just 9 months of next year. So the rest of that increase would happen in the year after that. The $49,546 increase is due to some changes in workman's comp rates and employee health and dental status changes. So here's our bright spot. The Employee Benefit Trust has been doing well. This slide shows a comparison of fiscal year 2021 to 21-22. Although total revenues dropped year over year, the drop in claims offset this, providing a $360,000 increase of the fund's net position. The trust is considered a fiduciary fund, so the balance is called net position, but is really the same thing as fund balance. The initial cash investment to the trust was $1.4 million, so the net position has increased $910,000 since the trust was created. We are hopeful that premium increases will be minimal due to the trust performing well. A 1% increase would increase the general fund expenses by $43,000. It's fairly common to have an 8% or higher increase in health insurance year over year. We're hoping that doesn't happen, but that could cause an increase of $350,000 to the general fund. In November of 2021, the trust entered an agreement with a company called Script Sourcing to provide lower cost prescription drugs for the high-end prescriptions on the city's plan. That agreement has saved the city over $106,000 in a year and a half. Let's take a look back at last fiscal year. This slide shows original budgets for each department and their actual expenses. The budget amounts do not include the amendment that the council approved in September. The majority of these budget savings are due to savings in personnel costs, mostly due to labor shortages. Building maintenance went over the original budget due to the expense of fixing the library stairs that was paid for by Ignite. Police grants were awarded after the budget was approved and included in the amendment, as was the purchase of an armored vehicle from Drug Task Force funding. The fire department went over due to the carryover for the boathouse. The $513,000 savings in the street department was transferred to the Kathleen Widening Project, which sits in a different fund than the general fund. So the offset of that savings shows up in general government as a transfer of $542,000. The total savings from the original budget was $1.2 million, and that savings is what was used to purchase the property next to the police station. These 6 positions were approved in the 22-23 budget, but have not been filled. Not filling these positions will save the city $436,000 in fiscal year 23-24. Due to the $1 million shortage in the projected budget, even before the departments submit their budgets, I would not recommend filling these positions this fiscal year or next fiscal year. The last thing I want to talk about is amending the budget for the 3% increase to the police department's COLAs. That was not included in the 22-23 budget. Due to the current vacancies in the police department, the personnel budget for that department is currently right on track for where they should be at this time in the fiscal year. In order to avoid the cost of another public hearing, I would recommend waiting and doing one amendment at the end of the fiscal year. And with that, I am open to questions.
Questions from council?
Go ahead, Dan. I'll go for you.
Yeah?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Bonnie, I would like to, if you could bring up, the slides aren't numbered, so I don't know which one it is. It starts with the general fund budgeted wages and benefits. Has 3 columns. There we are. Very good. So the 0% COLA for LCEA, has that been negotiated already?
No.
Okay, so that's wishful thinking.
Well, I guess it depends on who you're talking to.
Okay. All right. And then the next slide, which was the new slide. I don't have it here. Back one. There you go. Merit increases for all departments except for public safety. Does that include water and wastewater too?
No, this is just general fund.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Christie?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bonnie, I would like to revisit the conversation. You recommend that we don't amend the budget, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that, why we wouldn't have already amended the budget. No fault of yours. I'm really truly trying to understand why we would wait. We need to have an accurate budget that even if we're not going to spend that projected money for police or fire by increasing their budgets, I still would want to see an accurate budget. So can you comment on that?
Well, I would not recommend it just because public hearings cost money. I don't know how much actually, but we'll have to do another one at the end of the year. So doing 2 in a year just ends up being more money. And it's not really, I guess I don't see how it's going to affect any decisions that are made.
Well-
But that's entirely your decision, so.
So my viewpoint on that is for an accurate historical record of our budget and what we've approved. I don't know that a public hearing costs a lot of money. I don't know. But I would like to have an accurate budget moving forward. So any other thoughts on that?
Agreed.
So I'll visit with Troy about that then and see if we can get that done.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions?
So Bonnie-
Woody?
So Bonnie, it seems like we're a little upside down.
We are a little upside down.
And so when we're upside down at this point, what, halfway through,
Correct.
do you go to everybody and go save money? Don't put new tires on your car, or
No.
how do we?
I wouldn't, your fund balance is in a good spot, so tires, that sort of thing, I think are fine. It's your ongoing personnel, wages and benefits that are going to, you have to have ongoing revenue to support those ongoing expenses. So.
So
yes,
the
it's-
way we get through is we use some fund balance, but you don't like to project fund balance forevermore type of thing.
Well, you don't want to use it, you're not going to have it to use for
Right, it's one
forevermore.
time.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So how do you got to cut back somewhere, yeah? Or hope for more income?
Yes, correct,
It's a balancing thing.
correct.
Pretty common, right?
Right.
Okay.
And I do have the detail of the revenue projections I can send out if anyone wants to look at those. I can ship those out to you in email, you can look through those. I feel like they are fairly, I tend to be a little conservative with them most years, and I don't feel they are conservative, just trying to get to where we need to be in order to balance this, so.
Oh, I appreciate your cheapness. That's a good word. I'm sorry, I don't have all the fundamental math things, but I appreciate the conservative approach to it. You guys have always kind of been that way, and it's been able to keep us not raising taxes all the time, but I guess it does catch up with you, doesn't it?
Correct, yeah. Well, when the COLAs go up as high as they have been, it's very spendy, so. yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to, if I could, Vonnie, to clarify, we're upside down. What is that for the projection of next year's budget, or how is the current budget doing?
Yes, for next year,
Thank you.
right, yeah. Yes, I think the vacancies that we have this year will get us through this year fine.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any announcements from council? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I got an email from Ms. Knutson, who wanted me to read this, so I will. That according to a 1987 public proclamation by then President Ronald Reagan stating that the month of March should be recognized as National Disabilities Awareness Month to increase public awareness of the needs and potential of Americans with developmental disabilities. As citizens of Coeur d'Alene, it's important to celebrate the attributes and contributions of people with disabilities and reaffirm our commitment to provide critical services and support that will eliminate barriers people with disabilities face in seeking employment and engaging with the communities where they live. This year's theme is Through My Eyes. It encourages business owners, employers, government organizations, and the entire community to imagine their daily experiences, interactions, and lives from the viewpoint of people with disabilities, and to recognize that those with disabilities are not just consumers but also producers who have gifts and talents to contribute to the good of our community in many ways. We are blessed to have several organizations in our community facilitating its support, encouragement, advocacy, job coaching and training, skills development, recreation, arts, social activities for our residents with disabilities, but we can do more. If you're not familiar with Down Syndrome Connection, TESH, Special Needs Recreation, Project Search, Team Hoyt, and CDA ACT, just to name a few, I recommend you learn about them and plan to attend one of their fundraisers or events, or plan to visit and take a tour. You'll be impressed and delighted with their programs and by those they are serving. Find out what concerns are and how you can support their missions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Christie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have an announcement, but I'm not the best person to explain it. I'd like to talk about the incident that occurred last week at Lake City High and what a great training experience that was. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like the Deputy Fire Chief and Chief of Police to come up and just tell us real quick and tell the community what happened and how you responded. I'm putting them on the spot. I did it right before the meeting.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
They did right when I walked in.
All right.
Your police and fire department spent a lot of time training for an event that we hope never happens in our city. And so last Wednesday, we got an unplanned drill of our plans and procedures. For the police department, I'll let the fire department speak to their response in a second, but as you know, we have school resource officers assigned to all of our high schools and middle schools, and then we have SROs, two of them, who split all of the elementary schools in the city. As it turned out, the SRO who's assigned to Lake City High School wasn't there that day. We had a substitute SRO in there from one of the elementary schools when the call came in. So we had an officer who was on scene immediately to be able to look at cameras and determine whether or not there was an active shooter taking place. We had a bunch of other officers in the school within less than 2 minutes, and within 4 minutes there was probably 15 to 20 cops in the school. And then pretty much the entire police department was there within about 6.5, 7 minutes. We had unified command set up. The fire department did a fantastic job of sending John Morrison over to unified command. And they had their staging area already set. And by about 6.5 or so minutes into it, we figured out that since there were some other hoax calls that were occurring in southern Arizona, this was likely one of those. But just to err on the side of caution, we had our officers continue to search the school, and then we took the time outside in the unified command post to kind of war game, if this was real, what would we do next? And so we talked about reunification procedures and transportation of wounded individuals, and how to activate the mass casualty incidents procedures, where we'd land helicopters, what we do in terms of traffic flow, and I think all this was a result of us really planning for this over the last number of years. And from my perspective, I had a meeting with the city administrator, I don't know if it was later that day or the next day, where I said that I was extremely impressed with our response and the coordination we had between the Coeur d'Alene Police and Fire. I thought we did extremely well. Very, very proud of our folks.
Thanks, Chief. You made it easy on me. I'll just ditto what the Chief said. We train for events that we hope never happen. And the resources that we have and the process that we have in place seem to work. So it was good.
Well, I appreciate that you willing to, I gave you just notice when I walked in, so thank you. I do think that it was a big deal in our community. It certainly frightened a lot of parents and students, and thank God it was a hoax. But I think it's important for our community to know how prepared we are. We hope it never happens here, but I think it's a comfort for people to understand how prepared we are no matter what the situation might be. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move for approval of consent as presented, including Resolution 23017.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, would the clerk take the roll, please?
Wood,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Miller,
Aye.
McEvers,
Yes.
Guggen. Yep. English.
Yes.
Okay, public comment. We have Brian Rogers. Next is Catherine Hall.
Good evening, council members. Tonight, we're going to do a little learning. Boy, I'm tired after today's work. It takes a lot. Milgram experiments. Has anybody heard about the Milgram experiments? They're very interesting, right? So the Milgram experiments, for those of you who don't know, an experimenter or a person in authority that actually has no authority, a teacher, basically the subject that's the experiment's happening to, and a learner, the person impacted, goes through an experiment. In short, it's an administration of 15 to 450 volts. Over 50s can be lethal. The authority would prod with 4 different statements. Please continue. The experiment requires you to continue. It's absolutely essential that you continue. You have no choice. You must go on. So there was a prediction. So obviously this was scientific. There was a prediction. And so if you want to guess in your own mind, how many people would bring someone to death with someone that had no authority? Think about that for a second. How many people? You're probably saying 0. Well, you wouldn't be wrong. Most people thought the same. Do you know how many people actually brought someone to death? We'll get to that. So basically, in that experiment, every one person questioned at least the first prod, which is, please continue. That's simple, from someone with no authority. But 61% of people in the United States killed the person on the other side. 66% outside of this country. So that's interesting. So you put that in a perspective of just a person off the street, you and me, in a room, with no authority, with a person that actually has no authority in real life, telling them, keep going, keep doing it. And we're going to bring them to death. Okay? Now let's bring that into the really interesting kind of twist, and we'll throw in the Stanford prison experiment. Anybody know about the Stanford prison experiment? Another interesting one, right? For $15 a day, male students were retained, 26 male students selected to play guards and prisoners, okay? So this experiment was supposed to go on for 14 days. It was really interesting. So during that time, what we looked at was what would happen. So day 1, the prisoners were arrested. By day 6, the experiment had to be stopped because it was so brutal that the guards, who had no authority, they were people off the street and students, were hurting and abusing the people that were prisoners that were the same. Now, interestingly enough, let's put that together. Could you imagine a scenario where a person feels they are in a place of position or power and has an additional person telling them to keep going? What would that be like? And what would be the outcome? And then let's think about something else. Let's think about bias. It's an interesting thing. Cornell Law has a great review on it. Thank you for your time.
Catherine?
Thank you, Mayor Hammond and members of the council. I'm here to speak.
Please state your name.
I'm sorry,
forget to
sir.
ask people to do that.
My name is Catherine Hall. You can call me Kate. I'm here again on concerns of those impacted by the Coeur project. If I may, please let me tell you about a few words that have been rolling around in my head since the February 2nd meeting and the February 27th meeting. The first word that comes to my head was hope. I took my 2 kids for a walk up Buckskin
to Nez Perce and over onto Moccasin to feed the goats and the horses that live there. On that walk, I felt hope after the 2-7 meeting. Hope that we had been heard and what we had asked for would be put into place. No access on Nez Perce, Appaloosa, and Arrowhead. I felt happy. I had faith. After the last meeting, I felt disappointment, sadness, and hopelessness. Disappointment that those who have power to help us were choosing not to. Sadness to think how our quiet streets would be changed, our way of life disrupted, because a developer with money in their pockets want convenience. I had hopelessness that some people no longer wanted to hear our concerns, and hopelessness that we would be silenced and overrun. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I went to paramedic school in 2013, the same year that the Boston Marathon bombings took place. During medic school, our instructor asked, if you were to treat the bombers, the people who injured others, how would you treat them? Would you treat them the way that you treated anybody else? Would you treat them the same way that you treated the injured in the bombing? As a medical worker, a firefighter, and a paramedic, we do not get to pick and choose who we help. If you call for help, I will respond and I will give you 100%, whether your house is on fire or you're having a heart attack. So picking and choosing who you help is beyond me. I do not understand, especially as we as a neighborhood and a community stand before you, asking you to help us. Yet your answer to us was no. I guess it's easy, and I suppose for those who don't live in the neighborhood, it doesn't affect you. So it's easy to say, oh well, too bad, I'm not going to help those people. The developer and the planning commission took our concerns as a neighborhood and spun it around to make it public safety concerns. Really, it's just more convenient for them to use our streets. It will appeal better to buyers in their cookie-cutter homes to have more access.
You need to summarize.
All right. I'm sorry, but we feel that the developer and the planning commission are maliciously dismantling our neighborhood. Our neighborhood is more than that. Our neighborhood is our way of life. I'm sorry I went over, but thank you guys for your time.
Thank you. Mark Jacoby?
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council.
Please state your name.
My name is Mark Jacoby, and I live off of Hutter Road. I'd like to discuss the Coeur annexation proposal and to talk about the Planning Department's Land Use Handbook. I actually had some handouts I wanted to give you, but I wasn't allowed to. I'll make those available later in the week for you, if you like. It's a sheet on regarding smart code zones versus building heights. I would like to point out that the western border of the proposed Coeur property is all T2 rural zone, and the neighboring north, south, and eastern areas are T3 suburban zones. According to the Planning Department's Land Use Handbook, the appropriate building heights should be no more than 2 stories. Yet, along Hutter Road mainly, but in a lot of the rest of the development, they're asking for R17, which would allow much higher heights than that. So it doesn't fit their land use handbook. It doesn't fit the neighborhood. Second point I'd like to make is the potential project is adding to adding traffic to the adjacent neighborhoods that's already having problems. And I would ask the developer to dedicate property for any expansion on Hutter Road, whether it be the expansion or future upgrades or even a frontage road, depending on what happens that way. On their undeveloped property, it's not developed, it's just alfalfa fields at this point. Rather than forcing the existing properties, happens to be mine also, to be taken because of the increased traffic from this development. And it's increased because of this development. So I would respectfully request that the council deny with prejudice the Coeur annexation and require that the developer and the planning department work with the adjacent neighborhoods to develop a reasonable, responsible plan that we as a community can support. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ron McGee?
Good evening. I'm Ron McGee. I live in Big Sky. Want to thank the council for their time, and especially your concern at the last meeting for the property owners. After talking to Randy, I'm not going to talk about Coeur tonight, but I want to bring to your attention, I think, something that's very pertinent that other cities are doing. The city of Hayden just changed their and realigned their zoning in the neighborhood context. That the reason they did it is they realized that people who had property 40 years ago under a comp plan, and now people 20 years ago have a comp plan, and now somebody's developing in a prairie with a prompt plan that's supposed to be good to 2040, doesn't fit. But that's what they go by. So they started saying, the people started saying, we need to go back to context of the neighbors. So they put in, I think they wanted development. They figured the residents and the landowners both own the property around them, and the owner, and they should be fair and balanced to both of them. And so they have to consider the comp plan, being though it's kind of a vague deal, it's not a law, it's a vision. So they discussed between themselves the opportunity of how they would do it. And they said, well, context is a very, it could be capricious and arbitrary deal. They wanted it defined. And other people said, no, don't define it. He says, one councilman said, here's the problem with defining it and getting it too close. It doesn't give you the opportunity of this plan is going to affect thousands of people because the density is so high that we can't just say it's got to be within 300 or 500 feet. So they say, okay, you don't just, the neighborhood isn't just 300 to 500 feet. It could be, 4 blocks, a mile, a half mile away if it does that much density. So they said, let's don't do it. So then they had a debate of how the council should do it. The planning department, of course, they didn't want it done because they said, let's just leave it 300 feet, that's who we notify. Brings up things to my situation. I live in Big Sky. I don't get notified because I'm over 300 feet. I have a deal here that even this council back in May didn't even want us to be able to talk here because we don't live in Coeur d'Alene. Right now you have a situation where even if I don't like what you do, I can't appeal it because I live over 300 feet away from Coeur d'Alene. I just like you to reconsider, do something like Hayden is doing, and let's represent the people more. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the end of public comment. We'll now move on to other business. A resolution regarding amendments to Personnel Rule 11. HR Director Melissa Tosi will present the issue.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this personnel rule is specific to our unpaid leave of absence policy. This is a general rewrite of the policy. And the policy was rewritten really to add clarity to the language, but there's a couple highlighted changes that I'll go over with you tonight. So the first change is really just an employee request addition. This is at the beginning of the policy. And this is just to give the employee some additional guidance if they were to submit an employee request for any of the different types of unpaid leave, for them to give additional explanation to the department head for the reason for the leave that they're requesting, the length of the leave that they're needing, why it's necessary, kind of why they've gotten into the unpaid leave that they're needing. And really any additional information that is going to help the department head in making that final determination for the requests that they're submitting. And then if the leave has any bearing on a medical situation, any documentation that is going to be helpful in making that determination as well. And I should mention that this slide has been updated. I caught a couple typos in there, so I apologize for that. And then the second main amendment has to do with the unpaid leave that goes beyond 12 weeks. So currently the way that that's worded is that if an employee is requesting leave beyond 12 weeks, that they would put that in writing and it would go to City Council. So the proposed change to that would be, instead of it going to City Council, it would go to the City Administrator. And then the City Administrator would consult with the employee's department head and the HR director as well before making that determination. And really the main reason behind making that change is that it's just a more standard internal leave process when we're talking about employees' leave. I'm not sure the reason behind it being going to City Council. I thought that was a little unusual. So I did run the policy by ICRIMP. This actually has never gone to City Council, so I wasn't sure the reasoning behind that. ICRIMP did recommend to change that from City Council to City Administrator as a more standard internal leave process. And then and again, it's never happened, but if an employee is requesting leave beyond 12 weeks, it's a high probability that it is going to be tied to a medical situation. And so we're going to be protecting any medical documentation that's going to be submitted with that as well. So that's really the basic reason for that change from City Council to more internal staff. And so this personnel rule has been posted for 10 days per the personnel rules. It was submitted to all three of our employee groups with no concerns there. So with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Questions from council? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You have a proposed motion before you.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 23-018, approval of amendments to Personnel Rule 11, unpaid leave of absence.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Dan?
You want to go first?
Oh, I'm happy to do that. I think I seconded the motion to pull this off the agenda, so I'm happy to speak to it. I don't have any issues with the additional information that's being requested that HR might want for all of the other options. The final piece where it would be removed from the authority of City Council and go to the City Administrator and HR Director, I'm never in favor of removing authority of council. So that's the piece that I just wouldn't agree to, but the rest of it makes perfect sense to get the information they need.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I would agree with Christie. I think if there was a reason, if the research had been done to show that when this rule was created, here's the reason why council was to be a part of it, I think there was a valid reason back when. I didn't really want to sit up here so that I could pass off my decisions to staff. I think, especially in light that it's just never come to city council, we can just leave it the way it is.
Did you want to respond?
I did look for some other examples of policy to see what other cities were doing. I did not find another policy that addressed city council as being an approver. I did find some other policies that did list if there was a strong mayor included. It did include the mayor, the department head, and the HR director. The majority of the policies left it up to the HR director and the department head to make the decision. So I did not find another policy that council was the decision maker on the leave.
Thank you. I would submit to you that it's not something that should come to council, mainly because it's a part of the daily operation of the city, rather than making a policy decision about how we manage staff. So I don't look at it any differently than any other personnel decision that they make on a day-to-day basis. Will the clerk take the roll, please?
Evans?
Yes.
Miller?
Aye.
McEvers?
Yes.
Gookin?
No.
English?
Yes.
Wood?
No.
We now have a public hearing before us regarding, thank you, that's wonderful, regarding modifications to our wastewater code, and we have Mike Anderson up here. Mike, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, and sorry to make everybody wait so long. I know this is the moment we've all been waiting for tonight, is to talk about wastewater. So yes, indeed, we're looking to make modifications to a couple of codes tonight during this hearing. And what those codes relate to are our rates and our cap fees for wastewater. Every 5 years, we hire an outside firm to look at our rates. They analyze to find two main goals that we're trying to attain here is that it's adequately funded. We need to make sure that we're able to pay all of our bills, and that it's funded fairly, and that means people are paying what it actually costs and as close as we can get to use the wastewater services. So I'm going to ask Sean Coeur from HDR to come up here and give a presentation on the meat of of the study that he performed in order to analyze all the steps that we went through to make sure that basically everybody's paying their fair share and nobody's paying more. And then at the end, we'll stand for any questions that you may have, and we'll seek for you to authorize this. All right.
Mike, can I just ask you a quick question while you're there?
Yes.
Can you just make a real simple explanation between rates and cap fees?
Oh, certainly. So rates will pay for, it's what it actually costs to treat your wastewater. So that's that bill that you get every month for $50 that pays for the conveyance of the wastewater underneath the streets to maintain all that, to treat it up to now a third stage of treatment at the treatment plant, and then discharge it out to the river. We have a compost facility that's included in that. We have me, administration, those folk. And then as well, capital projects. Now, the cap fees are what you pay when you first connect to the wastewater system. If you've got a brand new house, you need to connect up to the wastewater system. The entire city has paid for that wastewater system. For you to just connect up, you need to pay your fair share of that cost. So that's what the cap fees are intended to cover. It's your buy-in to the system.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mike.
Of course.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, Mayor, council members. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening.
As I go through this, I'll talk about the overall purpose of the rate study, an overview of the rate study process, and then we'll dive into the details of the wastewater rates, how we calculate them, and what those proposed rates are, and then do the same with the cap fees. We'll talk about the process, approach, and then the proposed change in those cap fees for new customers connecting to the system, and then answer any questions that you all may still have at that point in time before we move forward with the adjustment to the rates and cap fees. So our overall goal, as Mike mentioned, is to provide sufficient revenue to fund the operating and capital needs. So as he mentioned, the O&M, it's the staff time, it's the materials, it's the supplies to treat the wastewater and get it to the treatment plant. So from each of your homes, businesses, to the treatment plant, and then being discharged as clean water essentially at the back end. As part of this study, we also review the equity of the rates. So the rates that are charged, or the rate schedules that are charged to different customers based on how they use the facilities and the requirements that they have to treat the wastewater. So one of the key differences that you'll see within the rate structure is between a residential customer, so a single-family home, and a commercial business. What comes down the pipe to the treatment plant is different, and it costs more to treat higher strength waste, or I always say nastier waste, it just costs more to deal with. And so that's why we have a difference in the rate structure, and that's a key element of the study, is looking at that equity and maintaining that between different customer classes. As we do this, we also look at the long-term financial sustainability of the wastewater utility. So we look at that annual reinvestment or the renewal and replacement needs of the wastewater system and how we're funding that. Making sure we're maintaining adequate reserves for future O&M and capital needs as we go through time. And then maintaining required debt service coverage ratio. So that's the credit check on the wastewater utility. So there's been past debt issued to fund capital improvements, and we need to make sure we meet those financial metrics as we go forward. Now, we do that using generally accepted methodologies, but they're tailored to your specific customers and system characteristics. To meet that, it's a three-step process: revenue requirement, cost of service, rate design. Revenue requirements, the financial plan. What is the total revenue needs of the wastewater utility over a multi-year period? Cost of service is that equity discussion. How do we proportionally distribute those costs to each customer class so we can design rates to meet our overall revenue and proportionality requirements? So diving into the details here, the revenue requirement, that first step, we look at a 5-year period specifically, but we also look out over 10 years to make sure that we see anything coming down the road that we need to plan for today. So any major capital projects, any changes in O&M expenses that we need to address at this time in this first 5-year window before we look out into that next 5-year window. We based the O&M expenses on the 22-23 budget, and then we forecasted that out at an average of 4.3% per year. So that's taking all of the O&M expenses and what that annual change is, annual average change over that first 5-year window. Now, there's different costs within the O&M that are higher or lower than the 4.3. That's just our average projection. It does include additional O&M necessary to operate new capital assets. So as we look at the capital improvement needs, there may be additional electrical or chemical needs that go along with that. So we built that in as we looked at the review of the system. And as we look at how we fund our capital improvements, it's really funded with annual rate revenues, cap fees, and reserve funds for this next 5-year window. So no additional debt financing or borrowing to fund our capital improvements in the next 5 years. Similar to the O&M side, we look at the capital plan over a 10-year period. You can see some figures here. Our average annual expenditures are approximately $8.3 million over that 10-year period. We have a peak of 13.7 and a low of just over $3 million. Again, in the short term, we're funding that through existing rates, cap fees, and available reserves, and you'll see that here in a moment as what those reserves look like. We do see in that next 5-year window a possibility of additional long-term debt to fund future capital improvements. Again, that's in that next rate study. We built it in today knowing what we know today based on the capital plan, available cash, and revenues available. And when we think about that capital plan, it includes a couple different components. One is our renewal and replacement. That's the annual reinvestment in the system, so we maintain the existing pipes, pumps, and facility at the wastewater treatment plant. We also have other equipment replacements as well as expansion projects at the plant. So in this case, the tertiary membrane filter, that's adding that additional capacity in the system so that you can treat additional wastewater for customers connecting to the system as you go forward and grow and expand the city system. So as we think about how we put together a financial plan, again, we think about how we fund our capital improvements, how we're using the revenues we have today, how we're reinvesting in the system and maintaining adequate debt service coverage requirements and adequate reserve levels. And we put that all in that big picture to try and balance that as we go forward. So similar to the prior presentation on budget, we're doing a very similar process here where we're thinking about what are our ongoing expenses, what are our ongoing revenues, how do we balance that equation going forward. So here's a summary of your revenue requirement. This looks at three primary expenditure categories in the bars. So we have fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 27. The blue, or the bottom part of each bar, is our annual O&M expenses. The green is our rate-funded capital. That's the renewal and replacement funding that we're reinvesting in a system on an annual basis. And the purple is our current debt service. And again, as I mentioned, in this 5-year window, there's no additional borrowing. The red line going across, which is just below in fiscal year 23, the top of the bar, is our current revenues. So what this is showing us is when we add up all of our expenses and our capital funding needs, our revenues are not sufficient to meet our expenses. So we need to look at the overall level of rates to fund that going forward. So our goal in the rate study then is to take that red bar and get it to touch the top of each of those bars based on the projected expenses that we have in place today. As I mentioned, one of our key financial metrics that we look at is our reserve balances. So for the wastewater utility, we have an operating reserve, a capital reserve, a cap fee reserve, and an equipment and replacement reserve. Today, starting in fiscal year 23, we started at about $20 million. You can see that drops down pretty quickly over the next 5-year window. In fiscal year 26, we're down to about $5 million. That's the use of those reserves to fund capital improvements in this next 5-year window. Then, as our capital plan comes down, remember I talked about that peak of 13.7, that's in that 5-year window, then we can start building reserves back up to meet those overall target balances that we have. So again, drawing those down over time, this is after the proposed revenue adjustments that we are projecting. Debt service coverage stays strong. The green line is our target minimum. We cannot go below that. The red line is our overall current calculation, so very strong, running at about, with the legend on the right-hand side here, running at about 2.5, which is very strong for a wastewater utility. So we're in good shape there. The blue bars are our debt, so that debt stays flat. It's just our existing debt until a possible issuance of debt in fiscal year 2028 to fund capital improvements. So once we know the overall revenue needs, so what those bars look like in the prior slides, then we need to go to cost service. This is where we develop an analysis to proportionally distribute the cost to the different customer groups or the rate schedules. So residential and our commercial low, medium, high, and our subclasses within our residential group. We do this because we don't track costs by customer. I've probably told many of you this before, we don't have a residential pipeline and a commercial pipeline. It all comes into the same pipe, it goes to the same treatment plant, so we have to have a method of determining what those proportional costs are for each customer class. And we do that by looking at the total volumes that would come from a residential customer, a commercial customer, and the strength of that wastewater. So that's where I talked about earlier, is how hard the higher the strength, the harder it is to treat as we go forward. Ultimately, the cost service tells us what the overall revenue needs are for each customer group or rate schedule, and then we can use that to design overall rates. So when we looked at this, we allocated the fiscal year 22-23 expenses this current year that we would, if the council approves adopting the new rates, and the cost service results indicated that the classes are within an acceptable variance of the cost of service. Now, what that means in each year, if you did this study, everybody would kind of shift a little bit in between. But as a whole, everybody's around the overall need. So when you look at the bar chart here, the proportionality of the increase in the total column, which is the first column on the left, the residential customer group, and the commercial customer group on the right, that change that's needed is about equal for all of those groups. So that's what we're looking at when we talk about a variance to the cost of service. Now, one of the exceptions to that is the Fernan customer group. So there's originally an agreement that has recently expired that set their rate. We're proposing a transition because based on the cost of service, they're not recovering their cost of service as part of their wastewater rate that they're charged today. So at this, looking at the results of the cost of service, we recommend an across the board. The exception to that is our Fernan customers and our low-use customers, which I'll touch on here in a moment. So now we know the overall revenue needs, how we need to collect that, which is essentially equal across all customer classes, with the exception of those two groups I just talked about. We look at how you charge the customers, so that rate structure. And so we looked at that. That's based on industry standard approaches, so we're not recommending any changes there as part of that. And then we develop the proposed rates to reflect our overall revenue needs and the result of the cost of service. What that resulted in is an update to the low residential rate category based on their cost of service, as well as the Fernan customers where we're transitioning them over this 5-year period to the city rate in the fifth year. All other customers on the commercial side are treated equally. So what does that look like? So here on the top, you'll see there's two components to the rate. There's a monthly service charge, that's that top line where you see the blue box. That's charged to all customers. It's $14.99 today. The cost of service and rate study showed that that should increase to $15.74. Then there's a usage charge for each of the different rate categories. So if you look at under usage charge, there's a residential, that's $33.82 today for a single family home. And that would decrease to $33.18. So it actually balances out. And the reason for that is the green and yellow box just below that. Because we're able to transition Fernan up to their cost of service in the 5th year, and we're adjusting the residential low rate to reflect their cost of service, we don't have to increase the single family home as much. And actually it balances out that it's almost exactly the same rate today as what the proposed is for the first year. In the out years, everything's adjusted equally with the exception of the Fernan residential rate. On the commercial side, that usage charge is based on a total consumption component. So we have commercial low, medium, high. That reflects their strength of their wastewater. So the higher the strength, the more costly it is to treat. And you can see that in the rate structure where commercial low and then commercial medium and commercial high, it increases with that rate. We've maintained that as we reviewed the cost of service as part of that. So how does this compare to some of your neighbors and other regional utilities that we looked at as part of this? And so what you can see here on this slide is the current rate on the left and the proposed rate for the city, essentially that same rate. And then you can see Hayden, Post Falls, et cetera, as we go across, and then an average is that red line. Now, this is not necessarily an apples to apples comparison. Many of these agencies had different treatment processes or how they treat the wastewater that can be more or less costly. But it gives you an idea of where you sit in the region with different agencies as part of that. And again, looking at this, really at the $49 for this first year in fiscal year 22-23, we're below that average of 65 and below many of your local neighbors as part of that for wastewater rates. So next in our study, once we completed the rate study, was our capitalization or cap fee study. As Mike mentioned, this is a one-time charge to new customers connecting to the system. So this is not an ongoing charge. It's just one time when a customer connects, or it may be and can be applied to existing customers who change their capacity. So I always use the example of a bookstore turns into a coffee shop. their demands on the wastewater system are much different. Now, they don't just have a bathroom, they also have food waste and everything else that goes along with that, that would change their capacity needs on the system. Our goal here is to maintain that equity between existing customers and future customers. And Mike said it great. The existing customers have paid for the system that's here today. So these new customers need to buy into the system based on the value of that capacity. We do that by taking the value of the system, bringing it up to today's dollars, so what it's worth today. We back out depreciation and debt service, and then it's calculated based on the number of PEs, or population equivalents, and that's how we implement the fee going forward as part of that. So based on the results of the analysis, the present cap fee of $1,383 per PE would increase to $2,936. How that's applied to customers is on this sheet, and it's a little teeny, I apologize. But if you look at the first row, it's a single-family dwelling. There are 2.27 PEs per single-family home. So the present cap fee for a single-family home is $3,305. The proposed cap fee for new customers connecting for a single-family home would be $6,665. So just taking that cost per PE times 2.27, which is based on the population calculation that we have for the city of Coeur d'Alene. For many of the other categories, as you go down into the commercial, and you'll see again, commercial low, medium, and high, it's based on that relationship to one single-family home. So the amount of volume and strength that is charged to those customers. Very similar calculation here with the comparison to other regional agencies with cap fees. You can see again the present and the proposed for the city on the left-hand side in the blue, the average, which is just over $6,000, and then again, kind of how you compare to some of the others. These are a little harder to compare. Just as I said, it depends on when folks have updated them, how they valued their system, what methodology they used. You know, our methodology is probably more closely related to what Hayden Post Falls has done in the way we've done that, just given some of the past approaches and challenges to cap fees in the region. There may also, looking at this, Spokane has a very low cap fee. They have a very high wastewater rate. So there's some balancing there as well, depending on how each agency determines how they're going to fund future improvements as part of that. So with that, I will turn it back over to the mayor and councils for any questions you may have for myself or Mike and as we went through this. Thank you.
Woody?
I got a bunch. Yeah, well, I just needed some clarification. So cap fees, we sort of base a lot of our growth on cap fees. What happens when we stop growing?
So that's a very good question. And that's something that you would be planning for as you go forward. So now, assuming we have a good understanding of what that growth pattern is going to look like. Sometimes economies change and we have to deal with it. But in general, staff has been looking at, you have your facility plan, you have other planning documents that look at what those needs are going forward from a growth perspective, which then ties into the capital improvement. So we may have, and I'm going to use an example here, theoretical. You're expecting a large growth on the system, and now you have to expand the wastewater treatment plant, right? We're at that point where we can't take any more customers, so we have to expand. So you go down that path. That's what, you know, those cap fees and that growth are going to use, is to fill that void. So it's a blending of what we need, when we need it, and how fast are those customers going to connect.
That makes sense. Yeah, I guess we just don't stop, but you have to keep planning ahead, right?
Correct.
When COVID came, did you see impacts besides what things cost? I know we talk about how much a pipe costs or fixing it. Did that fix into your 5-year plan by looking back and then looking forward?
So to some extent, because we do look back at what we use water consumption in the winter time to figure out what wastewater volumes are, right? Because most of the water we use in the winter is going to come back down the pipe for the most part. That's our best surrogate for data. So that can have an impact on that. Now, what's interesting is sometimes that's up a little, sometimes that's down a little. And we may go up on the residential side, but we came down on the commercial side, right? Because we weren't all going into the restaurants for a little while there, but we take it all home, right? So we had this different dynamic going on. So that does play into it. When we went through and looked at this time for our latest data, comparing kind of what commercial looked like and what residential looked like, we didn't see any major shifts from what we've seen in prior studies. At least proportionally, the shifts weren't significant.
Gotcha. So rates and cap fees, treatment and forward-looking, that's kind of the breakdown between the two of them. Does, cap fees don't address wages or operations, it's all on the $50 a month thing, $49. When you showed us those rates, you say it's based around treatment, and yet we seem to be a pretty high-tech treatment place, right? We put the water in the river. Not all places get to do that. Is that why we're cheaper?
No, actually, theoretically, you would be more expensive because you have to bring it to a higher level of treatment. But the city and the wastewater utility have made investments back 10 years of how that treatment process is going to work. They went through a whole pilot process to say, can we meet the requirements that the state is mandating to us through a different way that's going to work out, and it did work out. So that's part of it, because if you look here, Spokane discharges into the same river.
Yeah.
So their rate is significantly higher. So it's just a balance of that. So I think it's past investment and financially management of the utility that's kind of kept you where you are today in this slide here.
And then my last question, when you were talking about industry standards, when you look to that as your tool to stay within these guidelines, does that matter of how our technology advancement compared to other in the state, or do you go bigger?
I would say I'm bigger at a higher level. We're looking more at the methodology and approach from a study standpoint. But when we get down to the design of rates, then yes, it does matter, because we're taking into account, how much of that, how many pounds is what it's measured in of the bad stuff comes out from biochemical oxygen demand, or BOD, suspended solids, or SS, nitrogen, phosphorus, all those things that we need to get out of the wastewater before it can discharge to the river. That does drive your cost, and that's what we try and capture between the different customer classes based on what they're discharging into the system for you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes.
Just one quickly. So I think that the builders in the area were prepared that there was going to be some increases to cap fees. Did you bring this proposal and what these rates were going to be to NIBCA or any of those groups?
We did make this public to them, but we did not hear any comment
No feedback.
from them.
And then my other question, you knew this was coming. Did you take a look at that irrigation in the commercial residential building that we talked about 5 years ago, that system? Has there been any look at that where basically you pay a sewer rate if you have 1 meter for your irrigation system if it's an old residence that's being used as a commercial property? You're charged a commercial rate, so you pay for your irrigation water.
Right, correct.
And the last time we talked about that, you said you may look at it again in this rate study.
So, the only method that we have currently of doing that would be to install a separate meter for irrigation on that, rather than, because the commercial, as we discussed previously, because of the commercial variance, between winter and summer. In other words, with residences, we look at the wintertime usage and figure, okay, that's probably going to be the summertime usage. But with a commercial, that isn't necessarily the case. It can be, there's just too much variety to base, let's say, a flat rate on commercial. Does that make any sense to you?
Yep, it's not a good answer, but.
Okay.
Well, and if I may add, that is a challenging one in the sense that account that what became a commercial is lumped in with all the other commercial. And that's where it gets tricky on the wastewater side, is trying to define what those customer classes or those subclasses are within commercial. And so there are folks that have tried to do that. I'm working with somebody right now who we have 4 pages of commercial rates. And that's pretty challenging to manage. Oh, wait, who goes in this category and that? And so understand your point as well, that is a little bit of a tricky, I don't want to say it's an exception, but it's a little different on that
And I
that's
think we
hard to
talked about
account.
that there was a couple of different ways to do it, but when you start with, that nobody's paying more, I know of at least 4 businesses that are paying more. They're paying for irrigation water to be put into the sewer system when it's not going there. So I just wanted to see if that was looked at. But anyway, thank you.
Dan?
Well, just a couple of quick impressions on the month-to-month is just an average user. I think there's not really any sticker shock there. One thing kind of jumped out, like for the single residents, if you're going to build a new house, and, I guess the developer is one thing, but I think of just average Joe or Jane that going to build a house and, going from, I don't know, 3,000 to 6,000 on one hand sounds like kind of a sticker shock. On the other hand, when you think of it in terms of, well, yeah, but let's say you were somewhere where you had to have something to do with that, and the system is that's I'm guessing that's quite a bargain. I mean, to be able to just hook up there and pipe in there, so that's, that's just the cost of life in 2023 and beyond. So even though we're concerned about, affordable housing and everything, but that seems reasonable when you put it in context, so.
It was simply a matter of crunching the numbers, and that's how it spit out. But it does happen to reflect the change. 5 years ago, I would estimate that the housing prices for in this example, a single-family resident have probably doubled, if not more. Again, it's not what we were aiming for here. We just put the numbers in, and that's how it comes out. But
Okay, I will open the public hearing. No one has signed up to testify, so I will close the public hearing. And there is proposed motions before the council.
could I make a comment, even though
Certainly.
nobody commented? I just wanted to share this with everybody because I thought it was kind of neat. Not that, sorry, what I'm about to say. I was curious to know when we were going into this rate study, what's changed between 2017 and 2022 when we started this rate study? What, in the department, which is what this is all about, be it the collection or the compost or any of the other stuff. And I just thought you'd like to know that some things that I found interesting. Volume of water coming into the facility has gone up 2%. Not much. Our total footage of pipe has gone up almost 4%. That would be what we have people, they build a new, a small development that they're put in public sewer and it comes to us. Well, we gained about 4% in total length of our pipes underground. What was interesting, where volume only went up 2%, but I calculated the pounds of what we're calling pollution. That's that phosphorus, the ammonia, all the carbon, the TSS, the stuff that's in the wastewater. That went up almost 12% coming into the facility. We were getting in 3.5 million, now we're getting in about 3.9 million pounds. But what I thought was really crucial and key here, all that's me is still cool, but I get it if you guys don't find that part cool. But this is the really good part. What's going out of the plant. Now, this was in 2017 when we did the first one. That was before our TMF, the tertiary, those membranes that were put online. We're only treating part of our wastewater at the time. We were putting out into our effluent, which is the water going to the river, almost 200,000 pounds. And in 2022, so what we've been doing with these low rates and everything, we put out 6,000 pounds. So we reduced our total pollution going out into the river by 97%.
Wow.
And I think it's fantastic. Not to sway your vote, but I mean, it's just fun to share, so thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Mike.
So where did all that go?
Really,
Like,
where's it going?
Fort Green.
Into the tertiary.
Feel free to swing by
1,000.
the
Get a tour?
compost facility in April when we have our free compost, because that's where it's going. That's another neat story.
I did.
Take it and reuse it in the dirt. So thanks for asking.
Excellent.
And bless his soul, you know, some of this goes back to Sid's effort to look forward and to plug away and to get those grants so that we could be sitting in the position we're in right now.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to dispense with the rule and read Council Bill 231004 by title only.
Second.
Second, will the clerk take the roll, please?
Miller,
Aye.
McEvers,
Yes.
Googan,
Yep.
English,
Yes.
Wood,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Would you please read the title?
An ordinance repealing sections 13.08.020 and 13.16.010 of the Coeur d'Alene Municipal Code, adopting new sections 13.08.020 and 13.16.010 of the Coeur d'Alene Municipal Code to establish users' charges and the capitalization fee schedule for the Coeur d'Alene Public Wastewater Collection and Treatment Works, amending Section 13.16.30 of the Population Equivalent Charge, 13.16.30 of the Coeur d'Alene Municipal Code to clarify adjustments to the population equivalent charge, providing for the repeal of conflicting ordinances, providing for severability, providing for the publication of a summary of the ordinance, and providing for an effective date thereof.
Move to adopt Council Bill 231004.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Seeing no discussion, will the clerk take the roll, please?
Miller. Aye. McEvers.
Yes.
Googan.
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Wood.
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor respond with aye.
Aye.
Those with nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned.